Awakenings is a 1990 drama movie directed by Penny Marshall, starring Robert De Niro and Robbie Williams. It is based on a 1973 book of the same name by Oliver Wolf Sacks, a psychiatrist who narrates his experiences and observations. It tells the personal stories of those who were victims in the 1920s of the pandemic of encephalitis lethargica, also known as sleepy sickness, a disease that mysteriously appeared in the early 90s. It is an inflammatory pathology of the brain due to an identified virus that spread throughout the world. The movie is about the true story of Oliver Sacks, who in the cinematic version is called Malcolm Sawyer and is played by Robin Williams. He works in a hospital in the Bronx with neurological patients who were diagnosed with Parkinsonism. Sawyer, however, understands that many of them had all overcome encephalitis lethargica many years earlier. Overcome in a manner of speaking, because the very disease had led them to a sort of catatonia and inability to move. In fact, they were suffering from a post-encephalitic disorder, much more complex than Parkinson's. So, he decides to try L-Dopa, a new experimental drug. The first to be treated was Leonard, played by Robert De Niro, a patient who had contracted the disease as a child. The first results were inconclusive, but gradually, by increasing the dose, Leonard wakes up from his state and starts talking, walking, and eating without anyone having to help him. Over time, however, Sawyer discovers that the drug has no permanent effects, but causes patients even irreversible damage, making them return to a dormant state. Leonard is the first in which L-Dopa side effects begin to occur, clearly visible through frequent tics and epileptic seizures. So Leonard asks Dr. Sawyer to continue administering the medicine and to film him, in order to collect visible data that could have helped him to better study the disease. The movie ends with Leonard returning to a catatonic state, and with Dr. Sawyer, who not only realizes that he has been able to study an unknown disease and a particular drug, but above all recognizes that he has found in Leonard a friend and a source of inspiration. The book can be considered a deeper insight of the movie. First of all, it is not a novel but an essay, a collection of Dr. Sacks' experiences and considerations during his work with post-encephalitic patients. Within the last edition of 1990, there are the doctor's long reflections that make room for 20 stories of 20 patients before, during, and after the treatment with L-Dopa. The movie is not about any of these stories other than Leonard's, and in the book it is perfectly clear why. Of all the patients, Leonard is actually the most interesting. He was a man of great intelligence, and despite the gradual development of his disability, he had managed to graduate from Harvard. However, during his doctorate, at the age of 27, he had to leave his studies, and 3 years later he was hospitalized. He read countless books and wrote reviews by typing with his only hand he could use, despite the stiffness of his neck, torso and limbs. In March 1969, he began the treatment and slowly managed to regain incredible mobility. He was like a man who had emerged from a nightmare or a serious illness, freed from a grave or prison, Sacks wrote. In April, he began to have the first problems. Leonard became irritable and unsatisfied. Tics appeared, and until July of that year, he lived in a state of violent turmoil and fragmentation. Then they stopped the treatment, and the following month, Leonard returned to his original condition. Whatever happened then will never happen again, wrote Leonard, typing letter by letter on his old board. The emerging, so to speak, obvious theme is purely scientific, i.e., the aim was to illustrate the awakenings of these post-encephalitic patients. But looking deeper, we can find a recurring theme in Dr. Sacks' writings, a theme that is not explicit, but that seems to stand out in the cinematographic transposition, perhaps emphasized by Robin Williams' interpretation. that is the relationship between doctor and patient, how essential it is to treat patients, taking them into account as specific and unique cases, not to consider them as numbers and identical to all the others. Each patient has peculiarities that make him or her essentially different from other patients with the same disease. It is impossible to turn men into machines, formulas and figures. According to Sachs, in fact, this perception has made a good part of the medical literature of the time infectious, illegible, inhuman and unreal. Health, illness and reactions cannot be understood in vitro by themselves. They can only be understood if referred to us as expressions of our nature, of our living, of our being. Sachs had a special regard for each of his patients. He even used to spend 15 hours a day with the patients, observing them, talking or trying to convince them to keep diaries or taking notes. Or he himself spent his time writing long comments and notes, from which often his books were born. But he was not the only one. Many nurses and his collaborators, after having worked for years with the same patients, began to know them well, and they no longer treated them as mere cases, but knew them in their totality, just as Sachs describes it. The perfect picture that shows the love and passion that Dr. Sachs showed towards his patients is clear in a scene in the movie in which one evening Sawyer falls asleep in a chair next to Leonard's bed, who had just started his L-Dopa treatment, and wakes up in the middle of the night, not finding him in bed. In fact, Leonard had got up, and when Robin Williams asks Dr. Sachs finds him really awake, it is possible to read in his eyes indescribable emotions. This is not the first time that I have read a book by Dr. Sachs, motivated mainly by an interest in psychiatry, a branch of medicine, in my opinion, that is often approached with wrong belief or totally unknown. First of all, Sachs has managed in his writings to make interesting some simple notes of purely medical thoughts and reflections. But he has also managed to make people like me, who are not experts, interested in psychiatry and make them understand some details. The choice of this book and this movie was mainly due to the need to spread the name of this excellent doctor with a good soul, who, like many others, has given his whole life to help the people who are sick, and, in this way, it is like paying homage to him.